Hello everyone, welcome to UMD Media. We are live on Facebook and YouTube. Those who are following us on both platforms, please share, like, subscribe so that many can reach to this material. Welcome to UMD Media. Your host is Getachew Reda. Today, it's my great pleasure to have Getachew Reda, who is the advisor to the president of Tigray state, live on UMD Media. Welcome, Getachew Reda.
Thank you.
Great. So this has been a huge effort to get you to be in touch with you because of the communication blockade and the very difficult situation Tigray is in. But I'm so glad that we finally make it, and hopefully this will work for the whole show. So today we'll be talking about a broader title, Quo Vadis Ethiopia, Tigray as a lens, but we'll be zooming in into the humanitarian situation there. As we speak, today CNN has reported on the atrocities that are still going on in terms of profiling Tigrayans, but also what's happening in Western Tigray, which is still under the control of Eritrean forces. So, I mean, it's very hard to introduce you. Many know you, but it's worth mentioning. Currently, you are a member of the Central Command of Government of Tigray. You are also the executive committee member of TPLF. But you had a number of positions at the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You are the Minister of Government Communication Affairs in Ethiopia. And you are also the advisor to the Prime Minister. I think you are the first to have a verified Twitter account from the mountains of Tigray. I remember this happened in April. But today we'll be zooming into what's happening in Tigray. So this is CNN's report from today. Men are marched out of prison camps, then corpses float down the river. This is a report from Sudan and from Western Tigray. So when we look at what happened in Tigray, what we see is this. I know you are still in a very difficult situation to be in touch with the rest of the world, or the rest of the world to be in touch with you. And this, from my perspective, has been a deliberate system of blocking information since November 4, then denying anything that's coming out, minimizing the crimes, in some cases even justifying it. Is this a fair assessment, given also you are in a Tigray is in a blockade of a number of types?
Well, yes, I can say it's a fair assessment, but it only describes part of the problem. Like you said, it has been a systematic. There has been a systematic effort on the part of Abiy's government and his partners in crime to impose a siege, not just a blockade, a siege on Tigray. Communication blackout, electricity has been cut off, transport services have been deliberately cut off, and in fact, we have the deputy chief of staff of the Ethiopian forces, Abebaw Taddese, begging his boss, the Eritrean chief of staff, Philippos Wolde-Yohannes, to destroy what little was left of the virtual satellite services in Tigray because they didn't have time to impose 100% blackout information blackout because they were retreating from retreating out of Tigray when our forces closed in on Mala. In fact, we have him on record begging Philippos to make sure the 3 virtual satellite equipment that were left in Aksum and Adwa were completely destroyed, so the blackout could be complete. In fact, they sent commandos to UN compounds, UN organizations compounds in Magala. This was Antonio Guterres was on record complaining about the decision by Abiy Ahmed's government to not only destroy communication equipment that belongs to the government, but also that virtual satellite communication equipment that belong to the UN organization. So it was absolutely systematic and absolutely premeditated, and they don't want any kind of information to make its way out of Tigray. So the previous 8-9 years, the 8-9 months, they did everything in their power to implement a declared genocide against the people of Tigray. We have countless reports of untold crimes that have been visited upon our people, and as part of their effort, the most important area they really worked seriously and very hard on was information blackout. Yes, the crime still continues. It's not just the western parts of Tigray, where the Eritrean forces are now in full control. They still continue to deny humanitarian access to our people. Well, the rest of the world is making a clarion call for speedy intervention, humanitarian intervention. Abiy Ahmed and company are still stonewalling and trying to do everything in their power to make sure the man-made famine, the generated crisis that they have imposed, claims more and more lives of Tigrayans. This is a continuation of their campaign of genocide. What is happening, and as you rightly pointed out, and as it was reported on CNN, what they are doing in Western Tigray simply shows you how brazenly they still continue to carry out their campaign of genocide, and unless, of course, the information blockade is part of their conversation. They have been churning out stories, including the story of Makara, which was done in a manner that was meant to hoodwink the international community into believing that something had happened in that area, while in actual fact what happened was something altered by the Amhara vigilante groups themselves, but by denying us access to communications, by imposing in communications blockade. They still continue to claim that this was indeed our job. But, you know, it is part of a very systematic and a very organized campaign to cow the people of Tigray, not just to submission, but also to make sure the people of Tigray are wiped off the planet. And it's very unfortunate. The international community, while it continues to put out statements after statements, there is little it has done so far. Although, yes, we have come a long way. The international community has been trying to do something about it, but it's a far cry from the kind of intervention that is required to avoid the kind of wholesale destruction that is being imposed on the people of Tigray, especially with the lack of humanitarian access and with the blockade of not only communication but also banking and other services.
Mm-hmm. This gruesome picture that has genocide, famine, destruction of health, education, agriculture, everything. I mean, prior to November 4, not only communicating to you, communicating to our parents, to the layman in Tigray was easy. Now, even to have this show, we had to postpone it twice. Even the quality of communication we're having now is not ideal. It's breaking and so on. So, given this siege, this blockade, and this total wholesale blockage on information, on denying everything, minimizing everything, and in some cases justifying it, how has been the communication from your side? Because what we have heard so far is, according to many, is the tip of the iceberg. So how is the documentation and communication impacted in all this? Because to investigate, to hold those responsible accountable, there is a need for investigation, for documentation, right?
Yeah. Look, you know, to give you an idea of the enormity of the challenge we are facing, it's not just about communications. In Olatambin, we know of people dying of starvation. Olatambin not very far from Mala, but transport services are very paltry at best. I mean, the kinds of services we have, because of lack of access to fuel, all that is very limited. Okay, so there is no telecommunications network, and that's far off areas in, say, Yakir. Would wait days, if not weeks, before the stories of the loss of children due to starvation can get its way out of Qolatam and Tumaga. So even areas where we could have done something about are facing aggravated crisis, simply because the rudimentary instruments of communication are absolutely blocked. The rudimentary services of transport and all that are absolutely blocked. In Tigray, you know, in the government, a few of us have satellite phones. I'm talking about not more than a dozen satellite phones. Even those phones are being shared among members of the leadership. It's absolutely cumbersome to expect to send message out to maintain a modicum of healthy communication with the rest of the world with only half a dozen satellite phones. Some, even their reception is not particularly reliable. Even international organizations which are active in Tigray have their access to all sorts of communications mostly blocked, and there are all kinds of efforts to muzzle them into silence, so they wouldn't come out with reports that would give the world some idea of what is happening on the ground. And of course, this is a systematic campaign on the part of Abiy's government to starve our people, because what they have they have failed to achieve through artilleries, through multiple rocket launchers, through napalm bombs, on all kinds of weapons against our people, trying to achieve through starvation. And communication is one important piece. Like you said, even internet services are a luxury we can afford here. It takes rerouting the entire data we have at our disposal to my place, so I can get a more or less decent conversation going. Even the conversation we are having has its limitations. So the blockade on communications, though limited it might appear to the rest of the world, it simply is part of the campaign, the genocide campaign that has been, or threatened, that has been implemented against the people of Tigray by the thugs in Addis Ababa and their partners north of the river. So it's very unfortunate. You know, I will tell you this. UN agencies, including the Secretary General and other people, the Americans, the Germans, you know, all people including, of course, the finest move, the recent move by the AUC, which from the get-go gave benedictions and blessings to the campaign of genocide against Tigray. They come up with all kinds of ideas of negotiations. And, we insist that even for any negotiation to start, the siege on Tigray needs to be lifted. And there appears to be a blind spot towards understanding how serious this issue is. Banking services are limited. People who could otherwise have purchased some basic necessities from what is left, what is available in the market, cannot do so because they don't have access to whatever is left of in their bank accounts, because banking services are absolutely locked. And members of the international community would have you believe that once once you agree to a cessation of hostilities, and then the whole idea of lifting the siege could come about, say, in a week or two. It's strange. These are not things that would require an exceptionally cumbersome physical arrangement or infrastructure arrangement. They were switched off Addis. They were done deliberately by Abiy Ahmed. All it requires is for those services to be switched on. But there is absolutely lack of understanding or unwillingness to understand the complexity of the problem, even by the international community. Even those who have the best of intentions come to us and expect us to agree to a cessation of hostilities, and of course see if Abiy could agree to the lifting of the siege of the people of Tigray. This, like I said, is not just an information blackout. It needs to be revealed for what it really is. It is part of the systematic campaign to continue and finish off the genocide project they had unleashed on the 4th of November in Tigray. Thanks to the gallant forces of Tigray, thanks to the still determination of the people of Tigray, we have managed to remove those child killers from many parts of the Tigray. We continue to take measures to make sure that these forces will never venture into Tigray again. But it's a far cry. Like I said, as far as communications go, documenting, we exert all kinds of efforts to document the level of damage that has happened to infrastructure, the destruction to schools, health care centers, hospitals, factories, not only public but also private industries, but more importantly, the number of people that need humanitarian aid, that are on the brink of starvation, and those who need immediate access to food. The information, we cannot get this out, although there have been, I would say, bigger efforts, sometimes heroic efforts on the part of international aid organizations to get the story out, like media coverage by the CNN and other groups as well. But it's very, very tragic. People who still think they can muffle us into submission continue to inflict damage on our people in all sorts of ways, and they won't stop our people.
We are having a communication connection problem with my guest, Getachew Reda. We are live from Tigray. This has been the third attempt to have this show live. It looks like it worked for a while, but he's now not in the studio. We'll see if I can get him back. Yeah, it's great to have you back,
Yeah,
Getachew Reda. Yeah, you can
yeah,
continue. I
yeah.
mean, this is the
This
solid.
is part of the problem.
Exactly. We want to talk about this problem, but we can't even talk about the problem because of the problem.
This problem because yes, it's a rather tragicomic situation we find ourselves in. Yeah. So, like I told you, we are trying to document as best as we can. We are making almost Sisyphean efforts to make sure that the kind of numerous, countless damage that have been inflicted on the people of Tigray, both physically, infrastructurally, uh, and in all sorts of ways, needs to be documented. And we are doing every effort we can, exerting every effort we can to make sure those are documented. But even worse, for us to be able to have a clear idea of whether preventable diseases are happening in our eyes. We cannot even provide what little is available to people who are starving today simply because we don't have access to information. We don't have the kind of reliable access to information that's required. We don't have the kind of real-time information that is required to provide timely intervention, and it's very unfortunate.
Mm. But talking about what you mentioned, all this happening in front of the international community, but people like Mukesh Kapila, who is an expert, he was the UN official who, raised the alarm on genocide in Darfur. As early as May 15, he said that this is genocide. But we are still waiting for the international community, specifically the UN or the US government, to say what it is. Why do you think is this not happening? Because if that would happen, I think it would unleash a number of commitments and measures, right? So is it because you guys are not, I mean, from the government of Tigray, not alarming enough? Because I saw your in hard talk, you mentioned a couple of times this is genocide. You are still saying it's genocide, but we don't see that from the US or from the UN and so on.
Well, it's very unfortunate. Some parochial politics is often involved in situations like this. Abiy Ahmed, as you know, was touted as a reformer when he came to power in 2018. He was touted as a reformer. He would tell all kinds of funny stories about how he wanted to bring about prosperity to Ethiopia. Well, as we have seen, Ethiopia, which at least at some point 3 years ago was considered to be one of the bright spots in terms of economic growth and all that, is now sliding to the status of a failed state, and it's all but a failed state. I mean, there is nothing Ethiopia has not yet fulfilled that would prevent it from qualifying for the status of a failed state. It is a failed state, the classic sense of it. But there are still people who think Abiy Ahmed is salvageable. Somehow he got into this trouble because he misunderstood the situation. He made terrible mistake of making friends with Isaias Afwerki. He was forced arm twisted into this by Amhara expansionists. There are all kinds of apologists. And those who are knocking doors for negotiation, as would have been that there still is a chance that Abiy Ahmed could be salvaged. It's very unfortunate. So if there is anything that clearly fulfills the requirements of genocide, it is what has transpired in Tigray. If you have to wait until the rest of the world sees tens of thousands of skeletons, tens of thousands of dead bodies, then obviously it would be too late. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I still think it is too late already. What we are seeing is a genocide of colossal portions that use not only the barrel of gun to destroy and to kill thousands of people, but also to use whatever political leverage these crazy people in Arakilo have to continue with a generated famine that is likely to claim the hundreds of thousands of lives. So it's not just famine. This is famine that is being used, being instrumentalized by the thugs in Addis Ababa to visit upon, to bring about extinction of our people on a massive scale. So there is no textbook example of genocide than what is happening in Tigray. Now, like I said, there are some very ugly politics going on. I don't know why. For example, the UN organizations have been sounding this alarm, but I have yet to hear the Secretary General come out in public and blame Abiy Ahmed, or not just forget the rest of the famine, the UN agency paraphernalia. For them to come out in public and say what they have done to the virtual satellite equipment that belong to the UN in Magala, they haven't said much in terms of denouncing such kinds of brazen acts of thuggery on the part of Abiy Ahmed and his partners in crime. Now, I cannot answer in full why people are dragging their feet to call this crisis by its name, which is a full-blown genocide. But I can see there is some politics at work. There are some European countries who still think that Ethiopia is too big to fail, and if we announce in public that this is genocide, and then this will play into the hands of separatists like us. It's very unfortunate. The Tigray resistance didn't start out as a separatist movement. In fact, to the extent that there is a tendency of separatism in Tigray, it was mostly imposed on us by the kind of concerted campaign of genocide that was authored by Abiy Ahmed and his partners. So there is politics, and there is also this rather naive assumption that by withholding the characterization of this crisis as a genocide, then they would give some kind of breathing space for Abiy to come to his sense and settle for some kind of negotiated arrangement. But as long as, Abiy, as we speak, is importing tens of thousands of Kalashnikovs from countries as diverse as Slovakia. I have never heard of Slovakia as an exporter of weapons. Maybe they have the tens of thousands of AK-47s left, and they would mind selling it for an extra buck, extra cash. So Abiy is so desperate to bring more arms to Ethiopia, to go out on a shopping bazaar for all kinds of toys that are meant to help him finish off the people of Tigray. And nobody seems to do so much as after a word that this is not working, and it's very unfortunate. Like I said, it's the genocide, and nothing is going to detract from its characterization as a genocide.
Yeah, maybe let's talk a bit in detail about the current humanitarian situation in Tigray. So, just 2 days ago, the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, released a report, and the humanitarian coordinator for Ethiopia, Grant Leahy, also released a couple of pages. And your government, Tigray External Affairs Office, latest release was from August 25. There are a number of things that are coming out, like you said, based on what's available, because there is no communication. You can't even, as the government sitting in Magala, you can't reach out what could be described as next door. I'm still having a communication breakup. This is insane, given that we wanted to talk about how communication blockade is affecting the very survival of innocent children, women, farmers, but we can't even finish a show with the advisor of the president of the state of Tigray, Getachew Reda. This is a second interruption in just half an hour. And this is a third attempt to have him on this show. And we had to postpone a couple of times because of the same problem. So Tigray has been since November 4 on a serious communication blackout. And even after the recapture of Magala on June 28, the siege has continued on the whole. Welcome again. This is a second interruption in just half an hour. So I was talking about this number of channels reporting on, numbers. It's indeed sad. These numbers are not just mere numbers. There are children's life, women's life, farmers' life, which are affected. We see numbers after numbers showing there is an intentional, purposely done blockage of aid. Here we are seeing from September 2nd, the report showing that the cash, the humanitarian cargo, only 10% of what's required. The farmland, only maximum of a quarter of the farmland is cultivated, and expected to have only maximum of 13% of yield, and so on. So the numbers are, gruesome. And you were mentioning about you can't even get real data on who is dying, how many are dying in the localities, in different localities, just those that are even under your control. There are, like you said, areas that are not under your control, Western Tigray, and here Northern Tigray as well, the Europe land, all that. So how or what do you hear from stories on the ground? Or can you tell us just examples of famine-like declarations that are being made from the UN and others? We are still having this problem. Let's see if we can get him back. So this is the report from the UN OCHA, Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. You see that the white parties, which is under mostly under TDF, and it is accessible for humanitarian aid. Unfortunately, that aid has to go into Tigray, that it's being blocked. So since August 20, there is no food in the stocks. That's the report from the UN OCHA. Okay, yeah. I hope you heard my question.
Yes, I did. Look, it's one thing. One of the modus operandi of the very people who authored the genocide on Tigray was to make sure peasants had their crops burned down, their farm implements destroyed, and whatever oxen or cows they had were killed. And that explains why only a fraction of what should have been cultivated is cultivated right now. Even in the absence of sufficient fertilizer, productivity is going to be very, very minimal. So it can give you a whole picture of the kind of situation we're going to face with whatever has been cultivated, like you said. People often would come up with numbers that clearly show people in the brink of starvation, especially children and women in the rural areas. As we speak in Magala, in many parts of Magala, people are running out of food. You can see the signs of starvation creeping in minute by minute. To give you an example of a civil servant who hasn't gotten any salary since May, end of May, and who might have a meager savings in the bank. The fact that he doesn't have access to banking services does simply mean that he will not be in a position to use whatever is left, meager sum is left of in his bank account to purchase whatever is available in the market. It's very unfortunate. So you see not just peasants, not just women and children in the rural areas, which for obvious reasons have been facing the specter of starvation for quite some time now. And in many areas, even children have started to die by their scores. Even urban dwellers who would otherwise have economic living are not in a position to do so because of the blockade on banking services, not just telecom services. People like yourself who could have sent remittances to your folks here do not have that access, and people who could otherwise have been spared from the kind of starvation that we're talking about simply by creative social insurance mechanisms such as people living abroad sending remittances to their folks cannot absolutely happen, simply because there is no access to communications, there is no access to banking services. So, all kinds of mechanisms are being employed to stifle the people of Tigray, not just into submission, but also to make sure that they are wiped out of the face of the earth. And people need to see it for what it really is. It is a continuation of the genocidal campaign by a different means, and it appears to be succeeding, unless something is done. Well, we are doing everything in our power to make sure that the thugs in Arat Kilo are forced into accepting our demands. We will continue to push the envelope to that end, and there is no letting up as far as our mission goes. But it behooves the international community to get its acts together and to really call a spade a spade, and come up with creative arrangements where humanitarian access can be expedited. I'll give you another example. Abiy has a lieutenant in Afar, his viceroy in Afar region is steeped in hatred towards anything Tigray. He's not only blocking aid against Tigray, but also against the people of Afar, whom he thinks are very sympathetic to the people of Tigray. So what they have been doing is what little comes in the way of WFP food trucks are being stopped and vandalized by vigilante groups that are organized by the Afar regional government, the best of Abiy Ahmed, and even those trucks that have made it past Samara would be stopped by vigilante groups, and the whole content of the trucks absolutely vandalized and robbed by these vigilante groups. And this is being done not only against the people of Tigray, but also against the people of Afar, who Awal Arba'a accuse of sympathizing with the people of Tigray. And this would perhaps give you a very small idea of how enormous the challenge that we are facing is.
In fact, the UN report from September 2nd mentions specifically what you said. From Samara to Abala, there is a delay. This extended delay, in fact, is leading because of the heat in that area, even spoiling the food, the aid food that should have been transported to Tigray and so on. So this is a serious problem the UN is mentioning. That's why since August 20, food stocks are empty in Tigray. That could have been distributed to the people. But I want to emphasize the fact that you mentioned about the famine. If you look at what this is, I think, from 2018. Yes, this is a 2018 book that mentions 1984-85 famine in Tigray or in northern Ethiopia. This is a book on mass starvation, the history of and future of famine by Alex Doal. He specifically mentions that even trying to use food aid as the weapon of war to starve TPLF at that time, he says, is a second-degree famine crime. But it was partly used, he says, to starve the people of Tigray. But you are mentioning now, because of the banking service blockade, because of transport blockade, every kind of blockade that's happening on Tigray, urbanites, even federal government employees, I think there are in hundred thousands of them in Tigray,
yes,
who are not getting paid or who don't have access to their bank, could be part of this people suffering from famine or hunger or starvation. This I don't think I have heard or read happening elsewhere, because famine is usually related to the poor rural area, those who suffered from, let's say, drought or some form of starvation and so on. So, and are you, in your view, communicating this enough with the little communication? I mean, we can't even have a show without interruption now. I can understand that. But is it possible, or is there anything that could be done to make this heard and seen?
Well, we are, like I said, we are documenting every destruction that has been wrought upon our people, including the specter of mass starvation that is staring our people in the eye right now. We will use whatever channels we have at our disposal, and of course, we'll be using our media to send the message out, so the rest of the world would see for itself what is transpiring on the ground. But it's very unfortunate. It's not necessarily for lack of information as to what actually is happening that the rest of the world doesn't seem to because you mentioned to what Grant Leahy had said about the challenge. He was being very I would say he didn't put the blame squarely on the government. I can understand why he didn't do it, but he clearly spelled out the position of the international community with regard to what needs to be done. And it behooves the international community to act accordingly. This is the one area. Yes, like you mentioned in Alex Deval's writing, Mengistu Haile Mariam did everything to 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 starve the people of Tigray, but more importantly, his focus was using mass starvation as a means of cowing TPLF into submission. It didn't succeed. TPLF managed to sneak hundreds of thousands of people out of Tigray to Sudan, and that carried the day. But his Mengistu Haile Mariam's alter ego in the person of Abiy Ahmed wants to beat Mengistu in his own game. So he is trying to avoid the kind of failure that he thinks Mengistu had faced when it comes to extermination of the people of Tigray through the use of famine and all other things. Mengistu was using cannons. Mengistu was using mortars, using napalm bombs. But Abiy has done everything. Now he wants to outdo Mengistu Haile Mariam in the game of using mass starvation against the people of Tigray. And unless something is done, either militarily or through concerted effort by the international community, Abiy would nearly succeed in the extermination of the people of Tigray. But like I said, we will do everything in our power, and we'll make sure aid comes to our people, and our people will use whatever resources they have at their disposal through traditional social insurance schemes to help each other out. And the government will coordinate efforts in this regard, and the government will leave no stone unturned until such time that our people have this access to food on a timely basis. But yes, it is being used and instrumentalized as a means of war, as a continuation of war. But more importantly, this is an effort by Abiy and his comrades to outdo Mengistu Haile Mariam in his previous game to utter a complete annihilation and extermination of the people of Tigray through all means at their disposal, militarily or through the use of contrived use of famine as an instrument.
One thing we are not hearing a lot, even from the international community, because the destruction, the looting, the impact is so huge that maybe it's getting forgotten the issue of the implication of the destruction of health facilities. So one thing, this is from Professor Tony Maganya, who was the professor at Magala University now in the US. He calculated what was in 1950s the number of diseases per 1,000 population, and compare it to what was before November 4, which was from 32 diseases per 1,000 down to 6.29. But he's saying because of the destruction of health facilities, infrastructure, we are back maybe 30, 40 years, if not 50 years. So he's calculating because of this lack of health care, we can see over 225,000 deaths annually in Tigray. We are not seeing this, talked about. So can you speak to that?
I wouldn't be surprised. I know Tony was a very committed member of the either referral hospital and professor in the university medical faculty. He's done extensive research in many areas, and he knew the ins and outs of the kind of robust health system that Tigray had before the November 4 conflict that morphed into a genocidal campaign. I'll just give you an example how dramatic the situation is going to be. I have been traveling. At some point, we were struggling for our lives. So we're moving from many parts of Tigray. You go to Zana, Adet, the War'i areas, Tambin, Kolla Tambin areas, whatever health facilities were there, were absolutely destroyed. I'll give you an example of a small clinic, a small health center that I saw in Bamba and Saharti. The Eritrean forces came to steal goats and cows from the peasants. And I was talking to one of the survivors. They had killed so many, the survivors, and he told me they took 27 goats, and he was the only person who stayed home because he was sick. So the Eritreans were asking him why he didn't flee his village like his friends did. And he said, well, there is no point for me to flee the village because I'm sick. Whatever is going to happen to me will happen to me here, will happen to me even if I go. And they were angry at him for not fleeing, but they were also angry at the same time with him for allowing his brother to flee. And he was telling me he didn't know what to make of their demands. If he were to flee and somebody was left behind, they would still be angry with the guy who hasn't fled the scene for not fleeing the scene, and they would berate the same guy for allowing his brothers to flee. And it was a rather tragicomic situation people had faced. And in front of his house, there was this health facility. They took away all the medicine. They took away all the medical kits and everything. As if that was not worthy enough, as if that was not bad enough, destruction enough, they made sure the entire physical infrastructure was lit up in fire. And this is not a freak event in Bamba's Hati. Wherever you go, all the health facilities have been burned down, not just their contents emptied by the Eritrean forces, by their PP partners, but they made sure even the physical facilities were absolutely destroyed. This was meant to make sure that even if they knew they would be forced out of the country, but they had to make sure that there was no physical infrastructure left intact for whoever comes after their departure, or the government of Tigray, to continue to provide the kinds of services it was used to give before the conflict. It was how systematic their campaign was. So I wouldn't be surprised if what Tony alluded to by way of study would materialize. It's already happening because preventable diseases are now claiming the lives of children, the lives of women. Maternal health care is almost gone in many parts of Tigray. Vaccination services are 100% gone. Even in areas where the health facilities are more or less intact, there are no medicines left. There is no electricity. There is no service whatsoever that can be decently characterized as medical services. And this is part of the systematic campaign to destroy and exterminate the people of Tigray.
Mm-hmm. That's, for me, it's like they destroyed what was there, and they are preventing anything from coming, a way of rebuilding, or even just supplying the daily supplies from medication. There are many people who want to help, to grants and international donors. They are shouting, or crying out for any entry to Tigray, and that's like you were alluding to, blocked. One thing that maybe was mentioning, I don't want to keep you longer than I should, but in March 25, 2021, there was a joint press statement by the UN Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. And then again, I have lost Getachew Reda. This is the third in less than an hour. How tragic the situation is clearly from one of the high officials of Tigray cannot finish a show because of a systematic, intentional communication blockage. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, again, this is our third interruption in less than an hour. we are living that real life that Tigray is going through. So just I was mentioning about this joint statement, and there were people, Tigray diaspora, and a number of entities opposing the involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. But this was released, and our understanding is they have been working on that. So, what is your view? That I mean, are you working with them? Are they working on this, or is it
No,
interrupted? Where are we?
Yeah, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission pretending to be protector of human rights is a case of Tweedledum coming to the rescue of Tweedledee. And I don't expect this people who are handpicked by Abiy Ahmed for none other than their visceral animosity towards the TPLF or everything Tigrayan cannot be expected to give a fair characterization of the situation in Tigray. In fact, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission from the get-go was involved in whitewashing the crimes committed by Abiy Ahmed and company. What happened in Aksum, even though Human Rights Watch and the Amnesty International and other independent organizations were coming up with very gruesome reports of crimes committed against the people in Aksum, the HRC did everything in its power to either downplay the magnitude and the gravity of the problem, or at times even going to the extent of putting the blame on TPLF, which at that point our forces were struggling for their lives. And it's very unfortunate. Even now, there are some UN organizations who, either for protocol reasons or because of lack of information and everything, still want us to believe that it is still possible to have an independent investigation with the involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. But any UN independent investigation is welcome for us. We have nothing to hide. In fact, with more investigation, independent investigation in Tigray, our people, even ourselves, will stand to gain, because that will mean a lot to making sure that our people's voices are heard and our situation is better understood. That's all I can say.
Yeah. So my understanding is there is no, I mean, at least that joint investigation is not going on, or you are not there.
No,
You are not.
look, I know of a recent letter written by the UN Office for Human Rights or something. I don't know if I got the name right. And the HRC, Daniel Bakala, High Commissioner, Daniel Bakala, to ask for a continuation of services. It starts with a very telling reluctance on the part of whoever wrote the letter, particularly Daniel, to address the president of the government of Tigray. So they simply refer to him as chairperson of TPLF, because they still are willing to consider the government of Tigray as an interlocutor to this process. So that's a political calculation. It's not a mere semantic confusion or anything of the sort. It was a deliberate withdrawal of recognition for the government of Tigray, and with people whose so-called human rights records are overly politicized. I don't think the kind of request will be granted. But we're still considering how to get around to this problem and work with UN Higher Commissioner for Human Rights, and other relevant bodies who would be interested. I know the concern is they were supposed to conduct investigation in 46 or whatever areas. So to the extent that there is going to be an investigation, we don't believe involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Council is going to add any value whatsoever. And if the UN is interested in conducting independent investigation, it doesn't need to be a piecemeal sort of investigation, but a whole investigation, whatever has been alleged, whatever has been alluded to by, on the media, or whatever allegations that may have been flung against us as well. So yes, we'll be open for an investigation, but we don't think Daniel Bekele's HRC will add any value whatsoever to it. In fact, it will detract from its credibility, because Daniel and company are in the business of whitewashing the crimes of Abiy Ahmed. Whatever human rights sounding lingo they might use, it's simply meant to lend credence to what otherwise should be discarded as a publicity stunt by Abiy and his minions.
Yeah, I think, in fact, in the beginning of the first couple of months, UMD media received information, credible information, that Daniel Bekele's office was hindering in one form or another. Maybe, I would be amiss if I am not talking about the precursors to this. Just briefly, this is July 11th, 2018, a speech by Isaias Afwerki. This is a full speech published on this Use magazine. And here are a couple of statements from him that attracted my attention. So July 11, 2018 is like 3-4 months after Abiy took office. So he's talking about political cleansing that should be done in collaboration with Abiy, and he's mentioning specifically the legacy, not only what happened, but the legacy needs to be cleansed, thrown into the trash. It must be erased from history. I think the physical evidences that has happened in Tigray alludes to what he meant just in July 11, 2018. He also talks about existing economy should also be uprooted and replaced by a new system of economy. And he specifically mentions Prime Minister Abiy has a keen desire to do that, and we have already started it. So, Getachew Reda, did you see this coming? Was it under your radar that the othering of Tigray that has happened, for decades, if not more than that, and then zooming in into what Isaias and Abiy came to call the peace agreement or pact? So, did you see it coming? Can you speak to that fact? How this was systematic?
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a mixed bag. We do. I first saw this remark probably a week after Abiy paid a visit to Isaias Afwerki. So we knew they were working in cahoots, and it was clear from the get-go. Isaias considered Abiy his junior partner, and he wanted to use Abiy in his efforts to carry out his like you said, the political cleansing campaign against not Ethiopia but against the people of Tigray. So his lifelong intention has been to dismember Ethiopia, and the only thing that he saw stood between his vision of dismembering Ethiopia and making Eritrea or himself a pharaoh in the region was TPLF and the people of Tigray. So we knew Isaias wouldn't stop at anything whatsoever to carry out his ambitions. But we're also hoping against hope that it would be foolhardy for anyone who wanted to survive in the Ethiopian palace, in the Arat Kilo palace, to make such a terrible miscalculation. So we knew Abiy had all his eyes set on becoming the king of kings of Ethiopia. He has he was totally unhinged, but to expect that they would do this to the scale, with the magnitude and the scale that has transpired, to say that I have forecast this, to say that we have seen this coming, would be a bit of an overstatement. But we knew they were intent on sending us back to Stone Age, but we didn't honestly expect for them to go the kind of lengths they have traveled to carry out such a plan. Yes, for Abiy, TPLF stood in the way of his ambition to become a king. For Isaias, TPLF stood in the way of the people of Tigray. TPLF stood in the way of his becoming the pharaoh of the entire Horn of Africa. So there obviously was a confluence of interests there. But it's like I said, it's a mixed bag. We knew they were working cahoots to destroy TPLF and to somehow cow the people of Tigray into submission. But if I were to tell you, we knew they would do everything to destroy the people of Tigray. It's not just about cowing the people of Tigray into submission. It's about destroying the people of Tigray from the face of the earth. So if I told you they would go to the extent of working to destroy the people of Tigray in its entirety, I would be lying. But the remarks you alluded to, we've been discussing them as part of the leadership, and we had been making all sorts of preparations, limited ones in many ways. Very limited. They proved to be wanting once the conflict erupted. And yes, we had general ideas that they were intent on destroying the TPLF and the government of Tigray and cowing the people of Tigray into submission, but that they would go this far to destroy the people of Tigray, to remove the people of Tigray, to wipe out the people of Tigray from the face of the earth, that we didn't expect. It's not with the scale that has happened.
To your point, actually, Haavisto, the European Union envoy and the foreign minister of Finland, mentioned that the leadership told him in February that they intend to wipe out Tigrayans for 100 years. So this is something that now, for a reason beyond my understanding, they say to international leaders like Haavisto. Maybe I want to conclude about talking a bit about what's next. I know I kept you long. I mean, the communication is important. You mentioned about documentation and so on. So is there any way, because when I was getting ready for this show, Tigrayan diaspora advocates and other international advocates were asking for, is there any way, whatever information you have about the atrocities, the damage, the crimes, the famine, who is dying where, and so on, timely pushing it out with the little channel you have. So communicating with the people of Tigray, within Tigray, outside Tigray, as you know, advisors like Daniel Kubrat publicly said that the war is not only limited to within Tigray. Tigrayans outside Tigray in the rest of Ethiopia are also targets. He said it in public. The war is larger than Tigray and so on. So the international community and so on. So can you speak to these aspects, like what's next with the investigation, even negotiation, and future of Tigray?
Well, I would try to keep this as short as possible. For one thing, our enemies have drawn their sword, and they will stop at nothing before they could destroy the people of Tigray. Whether you are in the diaspora or here at home, I don't think you will be spared. Like the guy, the half-literate cleric, church cleric you've been referring to, cannot get a measure of solace unless the people of Tigray are wiped off the entire the face of the earth. So we have to realize that our enemies are not people who would countenance a kind of truce between us. So we need to further strengthen our efforts. The Tigray diaspora, more importantly, should focus on continuing their advocacy works, continue to work hard, and to maintain the results they have achieved through hard work, and to continue to expose our enemies and to put light on the suffering of our people. That needs to continue. On our part, we'll continue to document the suffering of people, to use whatever channels we have at our disposal to let the world know what is happening and what is transpiring. And we'll continue as the government and Tigrayan armed forces will continue to take whatever action is necessary to make sure that our enemies are either absolutely destroyed or at least forced, arm twisted into sitting for some kind of negotiated ceasefire. We have put forward conditions, and we're not going to let our campaign to either militarily or through negotiation have the siege on our people lifted, and sooner than later, of course. We have to harmonize all our efforts. I'm worried that the literate cleric you refer to would somehow find a stroke of magic to reverse the strategic loss his boss has already suffered in the hands of our forces. I'm not losing sleep over Abiy Ahmed making miraculous interventions to reverse his fortunes. I am rather worried that with the reluctance of the international community to get its acts together and call a spade, many preventable days, thousands of preventable days will happen to our people, and we'll make sure that whatever efforts we have at our disposal, we'll continue to work with international partners, we'll continue to work with our people, more importantly, we'll continue to work with our diaspora, not only to expose the crimes that are being committed, but also to continue to carry out all the necessary measures that are meant to neutralize the threats that are facing our people. I think that would be enough for today.
Great, thank you so much, Getachew Reda, who is the advisor of the president of the Tigray state, and he is also the member of the central command of the government of Tigray, and he's the committee member of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Thank you for your time, despite the communication interruption, all kinds of blockade. I'm hopeful that we have helped our viewers in terms of understanding a tip of the iceberg of the challenge Tigray is going through. And I do hope to again have you for another show. For today, good night from here.
Certainly. Thank you. Good night.
You have been following my conversation with Getachew Reda. This has been in the making. We had to postpone it twice. And today, within an hour and 15 minutes show, we faced an interruption 3 times. So you can imagine how the layman in Tigray, the people of Tigray, the farmers, the women, the children are going through on this imposed famine, mass starvation, and all kinds of blockade. So I know people who are well paid, but they are not getting paid. They can't even access whatever money they had in the banking and so on. So this is the first famine that would affect both those who don't really have anything, but those who really have something, but they can't access it. This was the show for today. Please share, like, and subscribe if you haven't subscribed to our channel. I hope to bring Getachew Reda again in Amharic and in Tigrinya. For now, bye.